Hey, morning, I'm Rob Kemp and you're with us at Kemp Sales here for our sort of boat show specials that we've been doing. Today we've got Chris Owen with us from Challange Sailcloth, which is KS Spruce, the importer in the UK. Chris, before you ended up this side of the fence, your name is probably quite well known up north of the border from Owen Sales. You were a sailmaker in the previous life.
That's right, in the previous life I had my own sail off for 30 years. I've been in the whole trade for over 40 years. I started my own business in 1984, 30 years in the business, and I actually came through, right through from making sails on the floor right through to where we are today using the CAD software, which is really interesting for me. So I've seen it from both sides of the fence. I'm really enjoying this side of the fence in my later years, but it is still very interesting, something you never stop learning, and that's one thing. Every time we have a chat we come across things we've both come across in the industry, and it's still really interesting. And it's nice working now with a Sailcloth company. Sailcloth's always a bit of a dark art, I always thought. They tend to keep stuff to themselves, and how they twist the fibres and how much resin content, and we all look at graphs and go, yeah, okay. But at the end of the day, it's putting the sails together that really, for the customer, that makes it all worthwhile. So it's nice to be on this side of the fence.
Just touching on that comment about graphs you talked about, I think most of our customers probably wouldn't realise that every roll of fabric or batch of fabric comes with a graph, so we can have a look at the performance figures before the sale's made.
I mean, nowadays, especially with the software, and we both you still use Smart Azure software, there's an analysis system in it as well that takes that graph and transposes it, and means that we've got something of real value to look at the sails to see how it's stretching or how it's not stretching in the performance before we actually start cutting the roll. So as you say, every roll of cloth has to have a graph for that particular roll, and it makes us confident that what we're using is we're going to get good results.
Yeah, from a backup point of view, what we do here at Kemp Sales is every single sail we cut, we keep a list of the lot and batch number. So, God forbid we ever have a problem 5-10 years down the line with the sail, we can speak to the cloth guys and they can go back and have a look at the test figures on it. So, what we're here for today really is to try and touch on some of the ideas of some fabrics. We've spoken to another cloth supplier, and obviously Chris has got the chance to come and have a chat about the Challange product, which some of you guys may know some of the trade names like Newport, Marblehead, etc. So if I just give a run through with Chris from Kemp Sales angle, when we're looking at quoting a sale, we look at three kind of standards, if that makes sense, and that's a regular standard woven, then a hybrid woven, and then a cruising laminate. And I know you guys focus mainly on improving your woven type side of it, not so much on the hybrids. But with Chris's sail making background, I'm sure he will offer an opinion, because he's not ashamed of doing that at all. So if we look at standard wovens, you've got a whole massive range, haven't you, within the Challange?
Well, I say massive. I've tried to reduce it since I joined them, and one of the things when I joined Challange was that it was a big range and it was quite complicated. So I basically said to them, look, try and condense it so that the sailmaker can understand what he's getting. So we basically split it down into sort of an entry level, which is our Newport range, which has got 3 styles, which is an all-purpose fabric, a low aspect fabric for those yachts that are really sort of squat rigs, short rigs, and a pro radial, which is used for radial woven sails. And then you move into the next category, which is slightly more performance and endurance orientated, is what's called fastnet, which are much bigger yarns, much better protection from UV, which is a big problem with sails because they're up in the UV all the time. So the fastnet's for more endurance, longer distances, people who are doing voyages rather than just a day sail. And then moving on to warp drive, which is our bespoke radial fabric. It's a true warp orientated fabric that's used for radial sails. And onto our Marblehead, which is our top of the range, most tightly woven Dacron which is very good performance.
So just touching back onto that radial thing, without wishing to give away Challange's magic secret recipe, when you're weaving something together with a weft and a warp, surely that warp's got crimp in it. So people make this big thing about straight warp. If my physics is right, you can't do that, can you?
That's the big secret. And the one thing we do with the warp drive, it's why it's named like that, is we actually tension the warp fibres out in the long direction of the roll to take away that crimp. So we weave the fill yarns, which are the ones going across the roll, over and under, but the warp ones are tension, and it requires a different type of loom, much more expensive and stronger loom to actually tension these fibres. They're under a lot of tension. Whereas people say, a radial fabric is a balanced fabric, so the weft and the warp are the same. but you eventually do get crimp. So eventually, as that sail stretches, that over and under fibres, which are longer, tend to straighten out. So for radial sails, it means making narrow panels and things like that to make the sail last longer. But the warp drive is specifically for radial sails.
There must be some piece of kit, because the warp beams are normally pretty long on these things, aren't they?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Yeah, and the way they twist them as well, it's a real science, which is why I enjoyed getting into it from sailmaking, because it's things you wouldn't normally go into a weaving place and say, oh, what's happening here? Why are you doing that? Well, we do that because we don't want any crimp.
That's why we're really grateful for you guys coming along and talking to our viewers here, because when we're at a boat show or customers come and see us here, we get all the samples out and you look at them, they're just bits of white fabric. They all look the same. I'm pretty sure to the layman at the other end at home, they're all bits of white cloth.
Well, it used to make me laugh. It still makes me laugh when you see a little piece of sample there and you go, there you go, after all that, and no, it's all the same. But when you see it on a roll, it really hits you in the face, the difference when you start pulling across the bias and looking at when you lay a roll of cloth out, like on your bench, 10 metres, you roll a piece of 10 metre cloth out, you immediately see if it's a good fabric.
We can tell from literally the first second you unroll it, the 10 metre long table, if you've got any twist or waviness in it, we can't really use it. So from our point of view, consistency's key. And if, God forbid, there are flaws in it, as long as they're well marked, we can then work around it with the.
Well, that brings us back to the graphs. That's the real, as you said, your records. You've got to keep records of graphs, because if you like a particular roll, we can find it for you again, and again and again and again, and that consistency takes all the guesswork out with the graphs.
So if we come back to a few standard boats that maybe people have got relevance with at home, and we can talk about what fabrics you may recommend on that. And obviously we've got our views when it comes to hybrids, which I know you guys don't make, but we'll come through that. So, and I've got my list here, which we talked about before we started filming. And we've got, take a westerly centre, we've got quite a few of them here in Poole, and down in our Gosport area there's quite a few in Portsmouth Harbour. Take a customer sails one of those up and down the Solent, maybe a long trip to Poole as his general sailing. Where would you kind of go with that?
I think probably where it fits into our range is the Newport range. And depending on where you want to go with that, mainsail's pretty easy. I think AP, the AP is it's a good fabric. If the Genoa is, well, it is pretty low aspect on a Centaur, then you might move to the Newport low aspect. And if you wanted to upgrade that to really, if you're going to use your Genoa in anger, in other words, you're going to roll it away and sail with it, maybe roll to 100%, you might think about a radial sail, just to give you that little bit more performance if you're that way inclined, But the Newport is really what you're looking at for that type of sail. But there's no reason you can't upgrade the main to a Marblehead. It depends if it's fully battened or it's not fully battened. The battens really do help, I think, on the mainsail to protect the mainsail. So it's not as critical as the Genoa fabric. I always think when people are choosing fabrics, the Genoa is the one, because it stands there at the front of the rig, takes all the hammer, smashes past the rigging, the mast, gets rolled away halfway, pulled out again. So compared to the main, which is protected with battens, it's the one that I always spend a little bit more time looking at and deciding.
So you basically invest the material budget.
If I was going to do that, I'd say, look, the mainsail's been protected. Spend a little bit more money on the Genoa if you can, to upgrade it a little bit more to either radial, and if you want to go full blast, then warp drive. It's just a totally radial fabric. So, but that's going right through the range.
So in terms of the construction, if we take the Newport, going through the Marblehead, the R word, resin, a lot of our customers get terrified about the R word.
Yeah.
I personally don't mind a firmer finish sail, particularly on a head sail.
No.
Because it's rolled up, you're not taking it on and off all the time, but mainsail, maybe something a little bit softer might be.
Yeah, I mean, just to explain, probably the sailor doesn't know, is that the more resin you put in a sail, if I see a lot of resin in a sail, then I think, what's it hiding? But then a firm finish, as you say, some sail makers prefer a slightly firm, because when you stitch it, you get a nice smooth sail. Because when you puncture it with a needle, anything that's soft and flimsy will just crimp, and it doesn't make a smooth sail. So the firmer the finish, theoretically, should make a smoother sail from when it's brand new. But the problem is then, the resin then breaks down, not so much in a mainsail that's got battens, but certainly in a Genoa, it can break down. The good thing about having a slightly firmer fabric is the bias, because our big killer with sail design is bias stretch. If we get any problems with bias, the sail stretches, becomes not the design shape, and then we're, the sail's out of balance.
I mean, from our angle at Kemp SAILS, we look at the resin as a performance enhancer rather than the glue sticking it all together. So if you're looking at a material which is just stuffed full of resin because the fibres are all big and not very well woven, that we wouldn't use it. But something that's got a resin coating on it to enhance the performance, that's a different story.
But then we're back to the graphs again. You can pretty much look at a graph and say, "Ooh, that's initially in its first pull." When we pull the sample, if it initially goes very quickly, you know that you've snapped the resin. So you can tell very quickly that where the graph is, if it's resin orientated. But what you're saying is you as a sailmaker prefer to design sails with a firm finish, knowing that you're going to get a nice...
there's a trade-off.
There's a trade-off, that's the word. It's not filling the holes in. That's probably what we're
So that brings us on to my next boat selection, which is a Beneteau Oceanus 311. Say they're based up in North Wales, Bethely or somewhere like that. Do a bit of club racing, so they're quite keen on their evening racing up there. So taking that type of boat, again, relatively low aspect rig, where would you go on your range for options on that one?
I think if you want performance, you can equate that to lighter weight, less stretch, because basically when you sheet the sails and when you're racing, you don't want to be trimming them all the time. You want to be concentrating on, sailing the boat, getting the shifts right. Is that you basically want self-trimming sails almost. So the better quality cloth, like certainly warp dry for the Genoa, I'd go straight to that, and certainly Marblehead for the mainsail, and we do a low aspect Marblehead as well, so you've got the high aspect to low. So that would be my go-to if I didn't want to go down the laminate or higher tech route. That would suit me.
I think on a boat that's dual purpose, cruising and racing, that's quite important, because performance for most people is not how fast it goes, it's how long it holds its shape.
Now it trims. Do I have to keep re-trimming the Genoa? Can I hear it fluttering behind the main? Have I got to go down and trim it again? And whereas with it sails that are good quality cloth means that you do less trimming.
I mean, we get asked, I'm sure you used to when you had your sailmaking head on, how long's my sail going to last? And we use this XY graph thing, so you've got sort of performance in this end and durability along the base, and some cheaper fabrics drop off a cliff really quickly in terms of performance, but they stay at the big white triangle for a long time. So we're looking at one that's got a slow degeneration.
I think from a trimming point of view, which all sailors do, whether it's Genoa or main, is that what we're trying to do is keep the exit of the Genoa nice and straight as we can, and not make the sail wants to be able to exit that air off the Genoa onto the main, and if you've done your job right on the mainsail, it'll flow off the main. So it's really about, is that cloth going to give you that, and will it keep that for a certain amount of time? As you say, with the XY graph, how long is it going to last?
Yeah, it's a trade-off, isn't it?
If you go out first time in a 4.6, it's not, that graph's going to be fairly high. So the way you use your sails and the way you try and ease them in, I'm still a great believer in when sails are brand new, and I know it's always sometimes difficult. If you can use them without reefing first time out, just give them, it does make a difference. I noticed that sailing dinghies, if you put a set of brand new dinghy sails on, go out sailing when you're dumping the main all the time, those sails will have their distance.
So moving on to my third boat on our menu, which is a bit more of a complicated option possibly, is a Bavaria 44 in-mast furling mainsail. So the boat's out in Greece with a husband and wife couple, cruising it 3 months of the year, high UV. My go-to product on that very much would be a Vectran. I know you guys don't make that anymore, but a hybrid would be my choice for an in-mast sail.
I think that's a good
your take on this.
The loads, when you're getting up to a 40, 44 foot, 45 foot boat, the loads, we are starting to talk about proper loads. When you sheet that main in, you really are cranking on some loads.
Particularly if it's reefed.
Yeah. So, you've got, say, when you do roll it, let's say you roll it, 10%, you're then relying on the fabric, no patches, nothing, it's on its own. So it has to be much, much stronger. So it's got to be a fabric that's really going to take those loads, otherwise the sail's just going to get deeper and deeper. So my take on that would be a hybrid, or maybe a higher end Dacron, if you didn't want to go to, because UV is still a problem. Even with an in-mast main, that gap in the mast, that sunlight can still get through there.
We see lots of them. You get this sort of strip wide along the back.
It's got UV. I'm surprised nobody's invented something that covers the back, because it is a problem out in the Med, and especially the Caribbean. You see, as you say, you see that strip, what it's been, and it's that UV.
We had a sail in, I think was it back end of this week, where the UV's got to the back of it. The sail's only 4 or 5 years old, and it's a fairly low quality material that the sailmaker had used, and the whole leech has fallen off.
I think it's very hard for the sailor to understand, and we always moan about, oh, the weather's rubbish, you know. And when I come from in Scotland, and we've had a fantastic summer, and I'm noticing, just talking to sort of local sailmakers, that the UVs, you know, we have had a tremendous summer. We've had literally 6-7 weeks of fantastic sailing conditions, and everybody's been out sailing with it, which is great. But of course, the downside is the wear rate and the UV has been, you know, even though it's not a particularly hot day, it doesn't matter. It's that ultraviolet light that actually damages the sails, which we can't. You know, we want to go out sailing, we've got to do it, but a good quality cloth will withstand, you know, more UVs.
So the higher tenacity of the yarn, the greater the UV resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always a good reason to look at the, you know, the fabric is key. You know, we can make the best sail in the world, but if the fabric's poor, you end up with a poor sail. So.
That's right. Well, that's my job now.
So my last boat is Discovery 54. We've done loads of discoveries over the years. We make all their sails, or not most of them, for them. 54's just won the Blue Water Yacht of the Year.
Yeah, brilliant.
We've just made the last batch. Again, we used a hybrid on that, but you know, this is a boat that's going to go ocean type sailing.
Yeah.
So, you know,
no messing about. There can't be any issues with, you know.
With that slutter rig, you've got, you know, quite high aspect on the 54, but the genoa is very much a reaching only genoa, because it's it's not the supporting stay on the mast. So, you know, the genoa like that, would you maybe look at possibly going to a radial option on that with your warp drive, or sticking with something a bit more basic?
I tend to, within mass main, slightly worry me is that nobody will give you a cast iron guarantee it's going to fit in, and I think cross cut, you know it's going to fit in, but with a radial sail, you're not quite sure. I'd like to use a warp drive because I think it'd make a better sail, or sorry, a nicer sail. But I think, to be honest, it's just getting it back in the chamber and it's not so much getting it in and out in the marina, it's out in the ocean.
I think that very much depends on the mast, doesn't it? From our point of view,
if it's a Selden, we're all right,
because they've got the tension in the mandrel. If it's one of the French masts that doesn't have the tension mandrels in, and they've got really narrow gaps as well.
That's what we're talking about.
Gives you issues.
Yeah. So to be safe, I think anything other than Selden, then you really have to go cross cut. But yeah, I mean, I've done, you know, in my time I've done quite a few radial, and they've made really nice sails, because they do. I think they do last. Those loads coming out the clue pretty high, especially on like a high aspect sail like these Discoveries. You know, the loads are right up the leach. So if you can use
the rig on that 54 is colossal.
Yeah,
it's huge.
Yeah.
In fact, when we got the sail plan, I thought we got the wrong one. I thought it was for a 58. It was massive.
Yeah.
So crosswind sails, as we call them, or off-wind sails, I think the top-down furling type systems of massive, and bottom-up furlers have massively changed the cruising sailors off-wind use. I know you guys are working on some new nylons. We've got something to test. So
I mean, we're working on. You know, we've had the Fibermax range for a long time now, and really, we just try to improve the weave. Not so much the weave, because we think the weave is pretty good on the Fibermax, but it's the coatings, it's the porosity, and we can always tell that by how well it sucks down on the vacuum table. But it's really to keep the consistency and not to let it wearing off. That's the problem with these top-down furlers. They are being basically massacred on the foil, and it's not the way with a snuffer. It just comes down. There's a bit of friction there, but not much. But with these top downs, they're really torturing the sail.
I think using the word furling can be a little unfair. It's more of a top-down wrapping system.
Wrapping system. That's pretty good.
We've seen quite a lot of colour leaching as well.
Yes.
From nylons. I know that's
when you squeeze, it's like squeezing a flannel. If you really squeeze it hard, you do see the colour. But that's one of the big things we've been keen on with this new fabric, is that to stop porosity, keep the finish on for much longer, the urethane finish, and actually stop this leaching problem. Absolutely can't have that with different colours, you know. And I say, and the problem is that these top downs, they might not be used for 3 or 4 weeks. They're rolled, you know, they're wrapped wet, and then they're left, which is the perfect scenario for leaching. So that's this new fabric we've tested, and we're still testing it. As you know, you've got some to test, and that's one of the big things because my input to Challange is that, look, we are torturing spinnakers now much more than you've ever done before.
They get used more.
Yes, they do, because of the kit's better now. You know, the top down furlers, all you used to have before was a snuffer, or you're on your own. And I think these new advances, which are terrific, it means that, you know, husband and wife or can go sailing and have a decent sized downwind sail. And
especially with some of the more modern boats like the Hansas, for example, they've got tiny self-tapping jibs.
Yeah.
You need something to give you a bit of
You
option.
turn the corner, and then you go, "Ooh," it won't go, and then you put these sails up. It makes it really enjoyable, and it's under control. That's the thing. It's if something happens, the proverbial hits the proverbial, you can get rid of it. That's the key.
Later in the week we've got hopefully Andy Postle from Allsparks coming to talk to us with his carver and Selden furling head on, so that should make an interesting viewing. Just finally, before we shut down, performance sales, on the club race side of stuff. I know Challange don't do a laminate option, but again with your sail making background, there's that kind of balance between membrane systems or panelled sails. I mean, we very much favour the panelled option because I think you get a bit more control. But
and I think consistency again. It's like I like to see a graph, and I like to be able to analyse the cloth. So I like roll goods, and that's not just because I work for Challange. It's my experience with membranes, good, bad, or indifferent, has been I can't get a graph with the fabric. It's different every time. The fibre layout, and I use the software as well. I design membrane sails, but I don't manufacture them, and it's that sort of I haven't got control, and I think you're probably the same. Is that I want to see that roll of cloth, roll it out, cut it.
We've had good and bad. We've
had
membranes with films falling off, and we've had them that have lasted forever. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've moved on a lot. How long have been out now? 15 years?
15.
Yeah. So if we haven't cracked it now, there's things are moving on at quite a rate, but I think for the racing side, where weight is a big thing. I mean, I always say, well, why are you going for a carbon membrane when you've got an aluminium mast? But people still do because they want to take the weight out of the rig. But for me, if it was me on a boat, I'd want to see a carbon rig, full carbon rig, to justify
before you go to the full race laminate.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is the shape retention, because you don't want to be buying racing sails every 6 months. The club sail who's racing really wants his sails to last, and the problem is that they don't last as much as roll goods. Whatever you say, I'm sorry, Genoas do not. Certainly film on film. I mean, they are making advances where they're putting the taffeta in the middle, but you're increasing the weight. Sometimes you look at the membrane, it's heavier than the roll goods.
I think one of the first membranes we made was when I had my old Sunfast, and we'd made a roll goods laminate sail, and then we made a membrane, and we went out of our way to make the membrane as light as we could in construction. Weighed the two, and the membrane sail was half a kilo heavier than the roll goods one, and we'd gone properly to town and trying to keep the weight out of it. So it's all glue.
It's a glue. That's the problem.
Well, thanks very much for coming over today, Chris, and I'm sure if any guys listening at home want some samples of the materials Chris has been talking about, just message us through our website or social media platforms, and we'll send you out a little key ring with some fabrics on it. And thanks for coming, Chris.
No problem. Thank you.